How many do we have on Zoom?
Mike, Bernie, Kevin Jenkins, Keith, and Steve. We're kind of. They all check it out. So we're all here. Someone's perspective. And there you go.
We're all here because there's 4 people on Zoom. So we're good to go, and it's 8 o'clock, so let's start. All you have in front of you from me bringing in tonight is the agenda and the minutes, so just so you know, there's no. Okay, please stand. We'll call the meeting to order.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice.
Housekeeping items. You may have received an email earlier today saying we could possibly be downstairs tonight. We're not. All the toys were distributed, and so Toys for Tots is dismissed for the night. So we're here in a spot. Exits. We're all here. The restrooms are open. Members who are present. Hello, everyone on Zoom. If you have anything that you want to chime in on as we go along, feel free. Minutes from November 30th, you've had them by email and they are in front of you tonight. Does anyone have any alterations, additions, corrections? Anybody on Zoom have anything for the minutes?
Nope.
Well, you know, it's a collective no. Okay, thank you. All right, then the minutes will be accepted as submitted. All right, let's run down a few things under item 6 there, committee organization. In terms of our meeting schedule, the supervisor has said to us that the town board has approved our request to have 2 additional meetings in the month of February with report by March 1st. So as we discussed last time, it's looking like we need a little bit more time to pull everything together. So shortly, Michelle, the town clerk, will be posting those 2 meeting dates. They are, as we had suggested,
February 8th, February 22nd.
February 8th and February 22nd. And they will be here. Is that correct?
Yeah, we thought it'd be better since meetings have been here all along. Many of the other town related meetings.
So we'll be here in the month of February. Report to them. Record availability, everything that you have by email or you have here tonight in print was going out on the town's website for posting for the public. I know the notebooks are busting at the seams, but hang in there, we're making progress. Communication. When we left last time, I had set up a meeting with Honey Falls and Mendon Fire Department representatives to review all of the research and data, tables, graphics that we've been producing. And Anthony is here tonight. Steve Chitterer was there. Chief Truer was there. And what we did was just go through each figure that is referenced in Chapter 3 narrative that you have from email to make sure that the placement corresponds correctly with the narrative and that those figures are numbered in a succession to make sense for that narrative. And then you also received a list of figures, the document, to show there are 40 figures for that one chapter, which represents the bulk of all of the graphics that have been created by the departments for our use. So there will be fewer in the other chapters that you will see as the narrative is written. And they will be referenced back and forth because a lot of the information on those figures is still applicable to other sections in the report. So rather than duplicating them, I'll just refer back to them by number. This way, all the figures are at the end of each chapter. So when somebody wants to take a look at one, they can just pull it out from the notebook and place it by the narrative, or they can take a couple of them out, look at them, they can side by side the Vermillion Falls and the Mendon information that's similar, so there can be some comparisons, whatever you want to do. It just makes it easier functionally to work with the information. So we'll probably have department meeting again as we go on through the narrative again, just to confirm we have proper placement and that anything that needs to be updated is coming in a timely fashion. That was agreeable to the department reps, and I'll continue to work with them to get meeting schedules and that kind of thing. We have the report extension and the meeting schedule. So unless somebody has committee organization communication, we'll move on. Anybody from Zoom have a question? Okay, let's go on to item number 7. On our task 1, resources were from the departments and from the jurisdictions that are applicable to the fire service has come out in chapter 3 narrative. And I can tell you from what I sent you the other day, there's even a little bit more of an update to it. Nothing of significance. However, as I go through things, I'm finding stuff that I can put back and exchange a little bit. Also, one of the bigger changes in there that you'll see is we decided last time that instead of using 2022 for budget and references, current references, I'm updating everything for 2023. So I've made some changes in certain dates along the way in the narrative. But when we meet again, you'll have the latest version of that. Plus, I'm very close to sending out chapter 5, which is the demographic piece, the target features, and the natural features narratives. The tables that we had created and worked on, the fire department, mutual assistance, mutual aid, mutual assistance, and apparatus and equipment that is assigned to the types of calls that are identified on the feature tables. Those will be ready on the first meeting in January, which down the way you'll see here, the next item on the agenda. Those tables will be available from the departments on January 11th. In the meantime, I'll get you the narrative. So the fire departments are working on the equipment assignments, apparatus assignments, mutual assistance, and what they typically would expect to see is a type of call where these features are involved as emergency situations. So that will come out. So really the bulk of tonight, and the reason that I had asked you if you could stay a little later, is the third bullet under committee charge. And red it says resource consideration polling. So when we met last time, we talked about breaking into some small groups. We have elected official representation from the district, the town, and the village. We have fire department representation from the Mendon representatives, the Vermillion Falls representatives, and then we have citizen representatives. Steve is on Zoom tonight, Rob and David are the citizen reps from the village fire protection district, and Steve Chitter is the Mendon Fire District taxpayer representative. So what I wanted to do was get you into those 3 groups with an easel pad and a marker, and have you note your thoughts, what you want to see when we talk about resource considerations. We're looking at resources of staffing, we're looking at resources of equipment, and we're looking at resources as calls. That's going to be filled by equipment and staffing. So my third concern, and especially to the taxpayer representatives, what's the community's expectation? for sustainable fire protection service is we look at some modeling and making our reports to the board. So you can talk about all of those, but I'm going to ask you if you could try to organize your thoughts for scripting, look at staffing, then look at the equipment, and look at the community expectations. So however you want to do that, I would just ask you to collect your thoughts in those three groups. We'll do that for a while. When you're finished with that, we'll come back together here with the easel pads and look at what everybody's come up with. So these will help us forecast for modeling and what you think we need for resources as we consider the models for the town board report. So I know one of the things we've talked about already, when we looked at current resources, staffing is an issue. How many people do we need? And at one point, I don't remember who it was now, but somebody said, well, what about NFPA and ISO benchmarks and standard recommendations for the number of people? And the reply was, that will come out in resource considerations because those are benchmarks, those are standards. When we look at how many people we have, where do we stack up at that? How do you get more people? How do you want to get more people? What are the options? And what should we consider as we look at models? You know, can a district hire people? Yeah. Can a village hire people? Yes. Can the fire protection district hire people? No. Can the fire protection district contract? Yes. Can the district contract? Yes. And the village contract? Yes. So when we start cross-referencing your ideas of what you want to do, then we can make some check marks in the structures that are possible to deliver fire protection and see how those cross over, where they're going to be beneficial, where they're not going to help, that kind of thing. And when I say the ability to hire people, I'm not necessarily talking about, you know, a paid career department, talking about being able to hire. The district has a hired person now, Dale Sweet. The village has a hired person now, Pete Henry, and Anthony is in that mix, and maybe somebody else, I don't know. But municipalities, municipal jurisdictions can hire people, whether it's somebody to just sweep the floor, be a custodial, be a firefighter, it depends. So I don't want anybody to get the idea that this is pushing paid career staff. Gotten some feedback about rumors and things, and there's no endpoint here. You may want to consider that, that's fine, but I don't want somebody to think because we use the word staff, talking about hiring paid people, because we're not there. May come, but it's not part of the discussion right now. Okay, so staffing, equipment, and community expectations. We don't have a third easel, so Anthony,
Charles.
I don't need to write it. I can't really speak on behalf of like the entire board in that sense either.
no, but you are a commission member. Jerry's not a trustee, but he's here on behalf of the village. So you have a presence and a knowledge of district activities. So as you talk about this as elected officials, you know, you can feel free to express your concerns. So there's 3 of you here. So I'm going to ask you to take an easel and a marker and find a comfortable place and just, you know, talk among yourselves as representing elected official in your capacity, what the concerns are. Maybe you talked about something, maybe you haven't, maybe you've heard some things, maybe personally you have some concerns. This is important to us. Robin, I'll have you and David as the taxpayer representatives, grab an easel, and Anthony, why don't we just talk a little bit and I'll try to fill in some things, you know, from what I know, and Steve Chitter, you know, the other reps are there, so we can talk with them and they can hear us and we'll put that together. Where's the best place for us to sit so that they can hear?
We can move the mic, it's got a pretty long cord, so whatever you wanna put it.
Maybe we could just go over there to that table. Is that gonna work? Sure. All right.
You show.
All right. I think I have another.
The areas that started resources sampling,
Staffing equipment. If there's nothing else.
we're gonna look to provide suggestions for not only.
Sure.
You know, if you have anything else that you think should be part of your conversation, please write it down.
Probably better than
Here we go. Steve, you want to call it? Robin, the microphone is right there if you want to talk.
Steve, can you hear me? Can we get a call?
I can hear you guys, yep.
Can I give you my phone number and then at least the three of us could talk a little bit more?
Sure, yeah, as long as Muffy's okay with that, I'm gonna go with that. I just wanna like break some sort of open meetings rule or something like that, you know?
Probably wouldn't.
Yeah, I don't want to give it over the,
Here, Robin, hang on one sec. Danny, can you give her that number, please?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. we want something together. I think this is I don't know.
okay, hey, so
They don't.
I'm gonna put you on speakerphone and then at least you and me and Dave can have a conversation.
Whatever you wanna, they're talking to them. We're talking to them.
Patients by asking.
Yeah, right, yeah.
All right.
Yes. So that works.
Is that? Can you sit right here?
Yeah. It's no reason.
We're doing our expectations.
So this one.
Karen and Mike Arman and Pete Kester, are you all there?
I'm here.
I'm here, Muffy. Mike's here.
And Pete, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay, so unfortunately, Karen is a town board member. The public officials are in a breakout session in another area, but we're all gonna come back together at the conclusion of the breakout and go over everything. But Karen, if you have thoughts on anything that we're talking about, please feel free to add to it. But what we're looking at is the elected officials are a breakout group, the taxpayers are a breakout group, and then the fire departments are a breakout group. And I'm asking, we'll start with staffing. And what you feel that we should be looking at is we consider resources of staffing and where that would fit in our report.
His friend was in the hospital. His friend was going forward. That it took 5 hours.
Do you wanna?
Anthony,
some
why,
examples?
yeah, Anthony, why don't you start when I'm looking for your input so that we're grabbing information that is useful in modeling. So for staffing, we're here because there was an expression that we don't have enough people. So as we consider not having enough people, where do you think they should come from? How are we going to accomplish having them on a regular basis or from a situation where we can depend on them as opposed to when you make a traditional mutual aid request, you put out your need and you hope people are going to come. Where do you think we need to be? What do we need to look at to achieve what you want for staffing?
I think the simple answer to these, like at the 30,000 foot view, is we want to look at different types of staffing models, right? We want to see is a all volunteer duty night or duty shifts that can be fulfilled by an all volunteer staff, something that is within the capability of the departments to do, with whether that's through further incentivization, recruitment and retention drives. And then obviously there's pay-per-call firemen, there's part-time firemen, there's full-time firemen. We could discuss further mutual aid, mutual assistance, but I don't think that my personal opinion is that's not really gonna hold any water, given that we're already tasking a lot of our mutual aid neighbors with a good amount of requests for assistance, and the time delay in calling anybody farther away is pretty detrimental to the incident at hand. I think maybe more specifically, when we're evaluating these, we want to look at the critical incident priorities of each incident and what tasks need to be fulfilled. And frankly, just do we have enough people with these different models? If we have the top tier of maybe staffing would be considered full-time employees, 24/7, 365. While you have critical incident priorities at an emergency, how many people would you need in that case to fulfill all those priorities, all those roles? Is that along the lines of what you're thinking?
Yeah, would it be helpful if, as Anthony suggests, we look at various ways to get more people and then look at finances and the kind of equipment we have, the numbers of that equipment that we have, and see where paid people on an overlay have an advantage, or if mutual assistance, where that has an advantage, where traditional mutual aid would work, where some duty shifting might work with volunteers to look at keeping all volunteer. So if we present some options of staffing models and then walk those models across financial aspects, the equipment that's necessary. Is that a helpful way to look at this rather than projecting one of those models or a continuum of those models?
Muffy,
Yes,
I think that would be beneficial. I also think we should do a model where we talk about consolidation of the two departments. Where we also talk, we have duplicated resources. It would combine finances and maybe help with recruiting or down the road, help with, paying for staff is one department versus, or one district versus, 2 or 3 different municipalities coming together. If that makes sense.
yes, so consolidation of whoever would come together is an option for structural change. And in consolidation, then there would be a consideration of what that would mean for staffing. So as you say, right away, you would be putting the two department memberships together, and that will achieve more people.
I don't know if that solves your people issue, because on, like Anthony was saying, on the more critical instance, we already respond together.
Right.
We're already, we're already coming together for most MBAs, we're already coming together for all structure fires, all, most of the rescue related calls, we already respond together. So I don't think that necessarily helps you immediate help with, the people aspect, but it definitely does help with recruiting. It would help with being able to pay for staff as one group versus three different bodies. It would help with, we do have some duplication of equipment in both areas.
I think maybe what you're trying to get at, and certainly the way that I look at it, is why the consolidation of our two departments isn't necessarily gonna change the staffing immediately for our incidents. There is an administrative benefit there, where instead of two training programs, there's one training program. Instead of two different chiefs paths for the departments, there's one, and it cuts down on the effort of the administration, which is also something that we haven't really touched on much or talked about, but it's certainly a function of the fire department. When you get into the higher levels, it's obviously behind the doors and isn't seen by the public, but the fire department doesn't just exist on its own. There's certainly a lot of work that goes into it.
Right. And yeah, and I don't even mean the two associations or the two departments. I would mean more like the district, the fire protection, the village. You know what I mean? Making one joint fire district. That makes sense.
Yeah, you're talking about, the model that you're talking about in this consolidation is within the town of Mendon and the two fire departments, is that correct?
Right, so you would make a joint fire district that encompasses the entire town of Mendon.
Yeah, and to do that, it could be a joint district, or it could be one fire district.
Right.
So two pathways that could take. Okay, so your idea in doing that would be beneficial for recruitment. Anthony mentioned some administrative things regarding fire department officers, pathways for those kind of things. So consolidation opens a door to things. My concern right now is that if you have specific ideas about how to gain more people for staffing boosting, so to speak, I want to know those.
Well, I don't know if I don't have ideas on people. I mean, we've tried all kinds of things to get people to volunteer, and we're not having any luck.
Okay, so think beyond, think volunteer. Do you think that duty staffing could be a help rather than the alarm goes out and whoever can come comes? Do you think there are people who would be willing to look at duty time?
Right.
I think in the very short term, it's that some people, but I know on the Mendon side, we've never been able to sustain it. So when we started out, we get a few people, but it only lasts for a couple months and then it wears off.
Okay.
I don't know how you would sustain it. Obviously, if you had a larger pool and if you did a duty night with both groups coming together, you would get more people, and it may work, but I still don't know if it would be sustainable.
Okay, so, but it might have a better chance if there was a bigger pool of people, a la, now we're back to the idea of consolidating.
Right.
Okay, got it. What are the thoughts of all of you in terms of actual career people, whether part-time, full-time? Do you have opinions about how career staff would impact the numbers of volunteers, the idea of people would stop volunteering? What are your thoughts about actual career orientation in some regard?
So I think you can look at different agencies in the county, and some of them have had really good luck with holding on to volunteers, and some of them have had, you know, as soon as they started hiring career staff, they push the volunteers out. So do you agree with that, Anthony?
I 100% agree with it, and it's all about the administration that brings it in and what the culture is and what the vision for the future is from the top. And, you know, you look at, well, where Dave Smith retired from in Brighton, and they have a extremely strong combination presence, almost to the preference of the volunteers. But, you know, you look at somewhere like where I work, and we have 0 volunteers, and it's been that way since the mid-90s.
So that's a little more subtle and more cultural expectation and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Anybody else have a thought on career orientation in some fashion?
I think the cost is probably the largest question. The public's gonna wanna know, what am I getting for my money? How much is that money? But
Service firefighters are not cheap.
nope.
Not understand. Okay,
But I think that addressing that question of what does this do to volunteerism is an important one, albeit probably something that's going to be addressed in a very anecdotal way, because I don't know how to provide data. You can provide inference to Brighton and Fishers and other departments that have recently become combination. Henrietta held out for a very long time. But there's no hard data that you can put in there. So it's truly a narrative.
And then it very much varies on who the leadership is. If we form a town amended fire district and we hire a fire chief that is wants nothing to do with the volunteers, they're gonna push them out.
Yeah.
right, okay.
I don't know how you would. I don't know.
All right, is there anything else about staffing that you want on the board right now for consideration?
Muffy, am I able to contribute?
Yes, please.
Okay. How about some of the periphery types of things that need to happen at the firehouse? Are there needs from an employee standpoint that would be helpful?
Can you give me an example or talk a little bit more about what you mean, Karen?
I'm thinking like, because I don't really honestly know how things are run, but I'm thinking that probably the volunteers do everything at the fire hall. And perhaps there might be opportunities where you could hire someone to be on site so many days, or organize things, or do fundraising or something like that. Not necessarily firefighters, but recruiters, or I mean, there might be other types of employees that we might look at that could be paid employees.
Okay, what you're talking about is something that my colleague in Genesee County, Tim Yeager, talked about when he presented their county report. And that is that the county is looking at trying to be more supportive to centralize some of the administrative tasks that are now done on an individual department basis. So HR concerns, application forms, background checks, review of applications, making sure that all of the regulated training required by New York State of employees is accomplished. So your thought about having someone look at more centralization of administrative kinds of things, or even be attentive to the facility needs of a firehouse, that is driving towards staffing in another regard. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And to build on that, I can tell you that both departments have a long history of having administrators Monday through Friday, Pete Henry and Dale Sweet for Mendon. And they do take care of the day-to-day bookwork and budgetary items, as well as the cleaning of the firehouse. I would say that the volunteers for the last 15 years have probably been tasked mostly with fundraising and the operational side, including which is certainly a large lift, and a large chunk of the administrative tasks is the training programs for each department, which are obviously, we talked about, ever increasing in complexity and requirement. But are you trying, like, maybe saying bringing in maybe not necessarily a firefighter, but a training officer for each department, or?
Yeah, I'm just thinking outside of the box and thinking that perhaps that shouldn't fall on the volunteer staff as much as to have someone who kind of coordinates everything, somebody who can go out and look at any grants that might be available, things that volunteers maybe wouldn't have the experience to do that kind of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I feel like every other example kind of falls under the administrator role, but you certainly brought up a couple that definitely fall still to the volunteers for their attention.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Does anybody else have anything regarding staffing that you think we need to capture here tonight?
Muffy, did you mention, I know we talked about duty crews, but did you mention incentives for duty crews as an option?
I think that it probably falls under recruitment as a broad spectrum for volunteerism. And the way we deploy the volunteers is one factor, and then whether we change nothing with the deployment or not model or not, recruitment is certainly something that needs to be addressed, and the incentivization for that.
Okay, thank you, Mike.
So incentivization of volunteers might just be its own category.
Can you explain to me what a duty crew might be? Would that be assigning like days?
Yep, it's so right now, Pontiac Falls has a semi-successful program. It's not really strictly enforced, but the intent is to provide a driver, a officer, and 2 firefighters from 10 o'clock at night to 6 in the morning when the administrator comes in. And they're tasked with responding to all emergencies of any nature, to make sure that at least somebody is going and a fire truck will respond. So it's more or less slang for a scheduled shift, volunteer shift.
Okay, so they're like on call at their homes?
At their homes, yes.
Okay, I get it.
Mendon has a very similar program. They'll start at 9 and go to 5. But like I said, we've tried to implement it a couple of different times over the years, and we don't really get a lot of turnout with it.
Right, and you can't really hold a volunteer's feet to the fire when the pay can't get any lower,
Yeah, so the.
frankly.
We can
Well,
double
but
it.
at least you'd have a skeleton crew that you can rely on.
In theory,
Yeah, and then if they're not able to do it, maybe they find somebody to replace them to be on call. Is that
it's the theory. I can
Okay.
tell you the practice and the administration of the last few years with programs, at least on the fall side, is it looks good on paper. In reality, it isn't always executed the way it's intended. So
Okay.
there's room for improvement. So it is a valid model.
And that's
now,
definitely
do
the
you
same.
also allow that, like, let's say I'm a volunteer firefighter. Could I call and say, hey, guys, I'm home tonight if you want to put me on the on-call schedule or whatever?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. All right, so that's how that works.
It,
Okay.
I don't think, Pete, you can correct me if it's different for you guys, but I'm pretty certain the chief's phone doesn't ring very often with that call.
Does not ring very often with that call, but yeah, Mendon, we've automated it. So we use an app to Alpine, a red alert responder app. And on that app, you can see the calendar and who signed up for the duty crew, and you can sign it right on there. But it's still, it doesn't get filled very often.
I would think that would be, obviously I don't know the people that are all involved, but I would think that would be more enticing than to just constantly be on call, feel like you're on call as a volunteer.
Right. Yeah, I've had some discussions with our administration about reformatting our requirements to be based around that, because you often hear from the volunteers that, well, like, I don't know when the calls are gonna happen, so it's hard for me to say if I'm available or not. But if somebody's their dedication to the department is evaluated more on their scheduled time that they said they would give, then I think that might be more valid. at
Now,
this point.
somebody mentioned an incentive. What kinds of incentives?
Money.
Oh,
Money.
okay.
In Mendon, we participate in LoSAP, which is, I think it's a form of like retirement fund. So you earn a certain number of points a year by going to different events, fire calls being one of them, duty crews, one of them, meetings, trainings and drills and that stuff. And you accumulate these points, and the fire district agrees to put away a certain amount of money for you that goes into a fund, like a retirement fund. That's one incentive that we're doing. We just started it, so we don't really know how successful it's going to be.
You might have also, you probably remember from last year, the 10% partial exemption for volunteers. We consider that an incentivization, a recruitment and retention tool. Obviously, the school didn't hop on board with that, which was the lion's share of the benefit. But
Right. Are there requirements, like you have to work so many hours a year to get that?
it's, so the way that it's set up is basically we provide the list of the members that are in good standing against our bylaws. So we require, every volunteer to go to about 20 calls every year. And training and accrue some other points through activity. It's pretty minimal, but there are, to be in good standing and therefore to be submitted for that exemption. Yeah, there are requirements. That's a short answer.
Okay,
That's
thank,
very similar requirements.
Mike, is there anything you want to add as far as incentivization ideas or?
Well, the obvious one, which both departments know is a bit of a challenge, is recruitment, right? Finding a way to recruit more members, but we've tried lots of ways to do that. We've recruited, what, Pete, this year we've recruited 5 people in Mendon. 2 of them were prior members that rejoined, so 3 incremental members, if you will, this year, including Pat Jenkins, who just got signed up as of last week. But anyway, so
I heard that, and I thought maybe I was supposed to be there with a vote for Pat sign, but he
no,
wasn't letting me come.
he didn't need your vote. He got lots of votes. So, but the challenge in Mendon is there are no apartment buildings. There's no low hanging fruit, if you will, that we can recruit. Most people we would try to recruit are probably in their second home, and they're professionals, and they got a family, and they don't have enough time in their hands to begin with, let alone volunteering hundreds of hours a year to the fire department. So
I'm wondering if people know about that 10%.
Sure.
Not that that's going to draw a lot of people, but I'm thinking about people who are homeowners in the town that, might be looking for something where they can give back to the community, but that might be a draw for them. Have we published that at all?
There, through our efforts to get it passed, there was discussion, but it hasn't gone out too much as a recruitment tool per se. There's some hesitancy of a rush of people to come down for their tax exemption with no real intent to follow through with the requirements.
Well, I'm going to thank you for helping us out here right now, and we're going to put you back into the meeting, general meeting, while we review everybody's input. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you all for what you've been doing. We could be here until 8:30, or maybe we'll finish earlier, but my thought was getting back together. We've all talked about staffing, so if we go through staffing first, see what each group has talked about, and see if we can get some kind of a generalization of what you want to consider. We'll put a list together. Do you want to start, since the 3 of you were here?
Sure.
I want to talk to you. So, we didn't feel that at this point, the timing was right to start talking about whether we want to go full-time, part-time, or just remain involved agency. So we talked about some of the problems that we have with staffing. And the first one that came up is the qualified response 24/7. I mean, that affects both Mendon and Honeywood Falls. And it certainly is call dependent also. The nature of the call. If it's a call at 4 o'clock in the morning for somebody who twisted their ankle a day and a half ago, response is probably not going to be that good. So that leads into the next one, which is consistency between days and night. We both looked at a daytime response is making note that both departments have a paid administrator on staff who responds with equipment. But how many firefighters do you get to go with them? And again, that consistency, it varies depending on the type of the call. Is it an automatic alarm that comes in once a month, or is it the possibility of a legitimate, I don't want to say illness, that the
consequence.
yeah, right. So then we went on and we talked about training and the number of hours that are required, and how that affects our staffing, because in today's times, people don't have the time commit to the training hours that are required, which ultimately affects, new firefighters coming. We talked about, EMS, particularly because, if you want to talk about a manpower drain, EMS is probably the single most, single number of calls that draw manpower down and affect the consistency and the qualified response 24/7. It shouldn't, but it does. They respond to a call and, how long am I gonna be away from my home and doing the work that I have to do? And if, under circumstances, the ambulances are taking a significant amount of time to get to the call. So that again, that affects, staffing and affects response. And then we looked at, maybe a little in retention area, it's cost versus incentives. If I know Honey Falls, we don't really have an incentive to come in other than, a couple T-shirts every year and, a steak dinner. So, where a lot of departments, they have a retirement, plan. Well, that certainly, would have an impact on staffing and bringing in new members. Gives them something to look forward to.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. You don't have LoSAP in IFOs? Does Mendon have LoSAP?
We do. We just started it and we just did a 5-year buyback. So trying to incentivize the older people to be a part of it. That means that anybody that has been in the department for at least 5 years or longer would get 5 years of that paid back at a certain amount. So we did our best to kind of, the biggest issue with LoSAP is when you bring it into an organization, it really benefits the new members because they just started, right? They're going to be there for a while. Hard part is those older members that have been there 30 years kind of feel left out because, wait a minute, I've been here 30 years. What are you giving me for that time? But yeah, we did just start it. This is our first year paying it.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just,
No,
you said that.
it's
I
a
was
good
surprised. That it's not.
It's a good question. So we don't have that in Honey Falls. Mendon has that, and it is an incentive to become a member. So from Honey Falls' standpoint, it's something we need to look at. Some type of incentivized program. And then we just kind of talked briefly about, volunteer versus paid. Obviously paid is a very expensive way to go. It may end up being what we have to do. I don't know that. I'm just saying, but as it affects staffing, volunteer versus paid may have a strong effect on it. And then we started to go to equipment we never had.
Robin and David, do you want to talk about, is that what you focused on? Was it staffing? And then tied back into.
I think what we did was we started looking at through the lens, as Steve said, it through the lens of the taxpayer in town, taxpayer resident. And through that lens, the expectations were, if you call for help, 911, right, in this area, that we thought that meant everybody that thinks that call a lay person in town, whoever. And what does this what's the second word?
To receive qualified trained responders with the equipment they need in a timely manner. And it's all noted that meeting industry standards, because as lay people, we don't know those. And it was just a qualified.
Right, so from the resident standpoint, that's our expectation when we call, right? And then we go to the staffing and to the equipment, would be that they respond with the appropriate qualified trained people with equipment they need, and obviously in a timely fashion. But in the meeting industry standards means that the fire truck isn't a pickup truck with a guard rolls back, air packs, so that's different. And also industry standards for possibly staffing where, there's 2 in, 2 out training that, firefighter one, and you know, that you need those hours. And I mean, that's what we expect
Yes.
without knowing exactly what we're expecting. In other words, you call that that person, that interior firefighter has that, you don't even know what it is, but that your expectation is that's what's happening. That they're just not gonna show and go, well, I'm here, I don't have that, and I don't even know how to use it. So that's kind of, and it all kind of came to one from that. We didn't have any necessarily at this point, I think to your point. Suggestions on how to get to that. Our suggestion was from the equipment standpoint is the people that have been put in place, the district or the fire department, that they're knowledgeable people and we have to trust somebody somewhere that they have the wherewithal to make sure that that stuff is up to speed. Well, the equipment, the firehouse, the door goes up and down, et cetera. The staffing is obviously the sticking point, and we really didn't. We thought maybe we needed to flush this out a little more before we decided or suggested.
Anthony, do you want to talk about what we heard from Zoom?
I think we had a pretty similar conversation as the other three groups. Clearly, the people problem is the crux of any issues that we're seeing right now, and any falling short of the service that might be expected. You know, there's a good point of we want qualified responders to show up every time somebody calls 911. It's always somebody calls 911, it's their emergency, maybe it's their worst day. Somebody that's done thousands of fire calls. Maybe it's not really an emergency to me, but it is to them. So we kind of touched on a lot, and it's hard to really narrow the focus down to suggest changes or model this or. But I think we did talk about a couple of different ways to provide staffing, whether it's a fully 100% volunteer fire department, part-time firefighters, whether it's full-time firefighters, all firefighters, but the standards, the expectation, the quality of service that doesn't change. Whether so, I think you might have mentioned about the kind of taking these different suggestions and dragging them through criteria. Does this improve this? Does this improve response times? Does this seemingly improve the quality of training that's provided, or the quality and accuracy of the responder that's responding? What is the cost impact of this? So we had a few discussions. Incentivization of the volunteers was another part of this conversation, which is a cost in itself. The LoSAP program. We've had some movement with partial tax exemption and consolidation of resources in town as well. It was brought up, and what does that do to affect those standards? What does that do to affect the response times, the cost of service, the amount of administration and manpower that is put towards making these departments successful in the future? So I don't know that we really got a list of things together that we can put up there. But
Can I ask if consolidation? I mean, okay, other departments, running for fire district was Rich Culver, Worthington, somebody, or just those two? Those two came.
Morton, Hamlin, Walker.
Okay, well, that maybe is better. Okay. So you take two organizations that have a square footage of coverage, if you will, I'm trying to, an area to cover. And you don't have enough people at each place, but you put them together, but they now they have double the area to cover. And does that solve, in the long run, you might need one treasurer, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
But does that, from a response standpoint, Does that change anything if you double the area, but you don't have the people? You're just saying now I take my two, put them together and now I can muster some, but they're covering double the area,
Double the call
so.
volume.
Hmm?
You doubled the call volume then too.
Right, so right, so what did you gain by combining them?
Just my personal opinion.
Yeah.
It's the way that I look at consolidation in the town is that it does not affect the response to it. It does, however, affect the administration of the department. You go from having 2 training programs, 1 training,
Mhm.
and one of the biggest failures in both departments is
Mhm.
probably a standardized, easily delivered training program that doesn't tax somebody with a couple more volunteers. I mean, you're supposed to go on all these calls.
Mhm.
If you're a line officer, you gotta train everybody.
Right.
It's tens more hours, hundreds of hours that other people are spending fighting this. So the administration benefits from consolidation, I think.
Mhm.
Response wise, I think that it's not gonna change the staffing. There may be a small benefit, right? But without bringing in more volunteers or bringing in part-time or full-time staffing, I don't think you see a dramatic effect purely from consolidation. However, I do believe it's still a part of the puzzle.
Makes sense.
Well, I know we just did this little bit of an exercise here tonight. Do you feel there's a benefit in really looking at equipment here? Or do we know enough about equipment that you're basically gonna say, we have the right equipment?
I think we discussed it, we probably have too much anyways. I mean, I don't think either department equipment's a huge issue, maybe the age of it and the quality of it, but the actual physical equipment is probably the correct equipment. Whether it's paid people or volunteers on it.
I would mirror that sentiment. I think it's modern equipment.
So could it be newer? Yes. Did we need it? Probably not, right? Like there's things that both of us probably have that we don't need too. I mean,
Well, someday we may.
never know,
That's
right?
part of it, right?
Well, we'll see when we get to the features, the target features and the natural features, where there are duplications, where of how many pumpers do we have collectively, how many this, how many that, where is there a single, there's one ladder truck,
I think that's a tough one to pick on though, because if you look at them together anyways, you double the amount of equipment, you're doubling your area. Right. Whether you put.
Right, but to quantify what we have, that it's appropriate for the call types that we have, and that we have people who are trained and know how to drive it and work it. Pump operators, that kind of thing, and people have gone through aerial training. So that's what we're looking at is, with equipment, is it appropriate for what we have for risk? Do we have people who are trained on it, to use it, to drive it? Is it responsive? Is it maintained? Do we have finances to replace it if we need to, or modify that kind of thing? So equipment's a lot easier to look at than staffing is.
Sure.
And if we start from the community expectation point of what you have indicated there, that's the community's expectation for anybody who calls 911 for any response, is that's what they're going to get, whether it's law enforcement, fire driven, or EMS driven. So if you take that and you look at what we have and you look at the staffing issue, I think we can get someplace by taking models that are available and working these things back to the model to see where we gain efficiency, where we gain from what we have now, and if it's worth looking in those directions. So if we came up with a list of the types of structures that are available for jurisdiction and for authority, there's districts, there's fire protection districts, there's municipal departments, there's not-for-profit fire groups, and then look at staffing. We have to look at volunteer or combinations of volunteer and career or something like that. We have to look at administration. We look at equipment. Where do we gain? Maybe some economies of scale from some of these. Maybe we don't gain anything from some of them. Maybe some of them are backward steps. So this is not a wasted time. This gives us all a better idea where we're all coming from. Do you have anything out there in the Zoom land that you want to add to this?
They'd have to unmute themselves.
I don't, I think Anthony covered what I was gonna say, so.
Karen, are you all set?
I'm all set. Anthony represented, I believe.
Okay. Mike Armin, are you all set?
All set, Muffy.
And Steve Chitterer?
It's already been said.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you all for participating. If you agree, I think our next step would be to take those structures or authority and define them for you. That's our chapter 2. And try to do some cross-referencing here to see where we might pick up something you definitely want, where something isn't going to help, get that off the table, and start looking at moving into some modeling of what might be appropriate, and then try to fill in from there. We still have some data to collect from the departments, but I think we're in a place where we can start building a little bit of a direction for you so that you can start thinking about what might bring benefit to numbers of people and a realistic approach to getting to that piece. Does that sound feasible? Or do you want to come back and talk about equipment next time and community expectations next?
I think I'd like to get into modeling.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the expectations is no brainer. We can do that. I mean, it's done in my head. The equipment, we can debate if it should be a tanker or a tender or whatever. But the modeling is why I think we're here. So we really probably should take the time
Yeah, I
and
mean, they
get tight into that, right?
I agree.
Yeah.
can't
me
argue
too.
there.
What's that?
There's no reason to really spend much time on equipment. And it's
No, that's what I'm
rather
saying. I
than-
think we should.
It's gonna exist one way or another, right?
You can't decide equipment until you know what the model is anyway.
Right, right.
I guess if you have 2 people left that are gonna drive it, then maybe you do only need.
Yeah,
Yeah, right, or,
Otherwise-
you know, no, we could prove that. But I look at this and I go, if we took, I'm not trying to do sides left and right or anything, but complete volunteer departments, which we have now, with the exception of 2 paid people. On this side, of them, a complete paid staff on this side, of them, meaning a sheet of paper. The pros and cons, and then what's kind of in between the pros. and cons. A complete paid staff, all the best equipment in the world and 3 more firehouses, okay, and 25 earlier. Okay, well then the taxpayers out here are going, no, that's not gonna happen. The all volunteer is why we're here, we're not mustering that, so how do we get that better, which is incentives? Whatever brainstorming can come up with. And then in the middle is the combination part of it, paid for call. I don't know, does anybody do that in New York State?
It's a very gray area. We looked into it, and that's somebody that would be willing, and maybe you finding out the legalities behind it. It's a gray area. Just according to the state, it's legal,
Right,
but like you said, how many people have done it?
right,
There's not much precedence on for it. Out of state, it's huge.
is it?
Yeah, you can find places that have done it. There's documentation on it, how they do it. I mean, I'm sure you've probably seen some of that out of state.
I'm sorry, but what, I'd be lost.
Like paid for calls, so if you go on a call tonight, you would get.
So you're basically a volunteer, but if you go, you're paid for.
Yeah, for each call that you respond to.
You
I
get a,
think-
I don't,
Get some-
stipend, or I don't know what you can call it,
It's called paid on call.
paid on call, but you get flat rate, I don't know.
Yeah, because you can't pay based on performance, but you could pay on, like, that's the gray area, is what you're allowed to pay on, and then I forget what it is, percentage of what a career person would make. The still be considered a volunteer, right? You can only go up so high.
It's,
It's extremely, anyway, you slice it.
Yeah, it's
Model of
And- But my point is, all of that then falls in the middle there, someplace, and then throw it on why that wouldn't make any sense, or why that would be a good thing. Makes sense money wise, makes sense long term. You know,
No effect on response time.
I'm sorry,
No effect on response time.
But might have effect on your number of people. That's the downside of a small career department. You only get who's on staff, because there's no volunteers left. So if there's 5 people working,
right,
you get 5 people, then you're out until you start calling other people. Good combination department, you might have the career people that get there first, and at least you have a good amount of people, hopefully, that are gonna show up behind you. That,
well, you know, coming from a career department, or a combination department it's tough, because there's always a little bit of a rub in the middle, right? But in a combination department, used to your point, I think it's kind of career staffs are all the time, so they can handle like the dirty work, it's not the word I'm looking for.
boring work.
The boring everyday things that you need.
Routine.
The routine alarms, automatic alarm this week and such and such. And then leave, you know, larger staff for your stuff. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, I'm just saying. But that might be where you say it's pro or con in that particular scenario. So,
Find balance. Yes.
yeah.
Keep volunteers interested at the same time, because if you don't want to go to anything. Then, I mean, if we really, volunteers only went to fires, and that's twice a year, and that's a lot of training to do nothing, so that's a hard part, you gotta really find what is that balance.
But, and that's a downside of a career or combination department. The volunteers tend to lay back
Mhm.
and not respond to some of the calls. I mean, you're always gonna get a response for the house fire, the structure fire, those kind of things. But for the other everyday things that they need some help,
By the time the
they
volunteer
may
gets
decide
there, they'll be
not
gone.
to respond.
I mean, that's a tough
Well,
one.
it typically is, I mean, you know, because, and then the response was not to the firehouse, it was seen.
Oh, that's
Because there's nothing left there to take them. You know what I mean? The equipment's already gone, so.
certainly a policy issue.
Right.
Still go, just gotta keep that, want volunteers, you gotta keep them interested. You don't want volunteers, it's easy, pay some people, but I mean, that's.
The thing is,
Fine balance.
and I'm not or con one way or the other, but when you go to a full paid staff, then the community is a little bit out of the loop. Right? Because now it could be,
Well, that's where they
be
start.
driving in from Gates. I'm in and I'll see you tomorrow, you know, next, you know what I mean, is when it's within the community volunteers, and it's, they're
That's
more
what
apt to be.
they start looking at cost then, right? That's like when you have a full career department, that's when sometimes the community is more concerned about the cost than the response to that. What's this costing us? What's this look like? Like you said, they might not know the people because they don't live here.
Right. But it goes back to expectations where they have no idea who that person is. Whether they're paid, whether they've got 10 years experience or one, they just expect that person to be trained and they brought what they need, and it's up to some kind of standard. So,
But is that something? Because that was a part that I didn't think about. That, you know, is it that there might be one familiar face?
Like it's zero.
Right, I mean,
We
because
went
if it's,
through that with the ambulance.
right,
That's-
When it went from all volunteer, you started to get some paid people, and now it's a lot of paid people, and sometimes people within the ambulance said, we can't go to all paid people because we lose the community sense. And now, you know, it flips around, so this community has been through that expression of lost, you know, your faith in some regards, because it's not just community people anymore coming. So, you know, it's a mixed bag. And we've seen the ambulance change structurally from authority and jurisdiction. So it's not unusual that the community would be against a structural change in authority or jurisdiction.
the ambulance changed because it had to.
The volunteers were going down and down and down like they are
Right.
here. So paid people
Were brought
became
in
part,
to-
and then in
So,
all of
yeah.
that mix, there was the third party billing. There was the insurance changes, the healthcare changes where you have a copay. So the financial structure and the complexion of how EMS delivery with ambulance service came about has prompted some of these changes. But at first, you know, it was like, well, we can't lose our volunteer ambulance force because we wouldn't have familiar faces, you know, but it's gone on and, you know, when somebody needs service, do you care if the fire truck's purple, red, yellow, green? No, you want that. So,
And it's certainly comforting to see a familiar face on it,
yes,
but I think we have to be careful of letting that concern grow legs. Just the wider cultural implication is a lot of people that don't know their neighbor, but the next one. So,
Right, and I mean, that's, I think that's a perk if you have to go first.
Certainly.
Past that.
And I think every good fire department strives to be involved
And
deeply
they
in
want
its
it.
community.
we want to be community. I mean, that's why we get events and things, but I don't know that we should be constrained
No,
by that or overwhelmed by any change.
I think that a familiar face, if to your point, doesn't have to be the face you recognize, but you would recognize firefighter from 100 yards. Helmet, that's the familiar face I think that you need to see. You know, it's nice that you can call him by his first name, but if you can't, you already know that person. Right? You know, it's like a police officer. You don't know that police officer, but you know that they're a police officer and bring services our expectations with. So I think that's kind of already almost a blank face, but the rest of it is the comforting factor, if you will. So, right, it's what they represent. Exactly, right.
Well, I guess as a person who's, you know, newly minted on the corporate side of the Honey Falls Fire Department, I just, you know, I question that because I don't think that we have done a very good job in our community to let people know that we need help.
It's hard to admit when you're failing.
Yeah, it is, but I don't know, that's something I do.
You're not, so, okay,
But
When
you
people
love to kinda
say-
know what's really going on before you make the whole change. I mean,
yeah.
I'm totally
An
all about that.
education
We give them the
process.
opportunity at that last ditch effort where they're paying for it literally. And that's what it comes down to.
I think you do a great job with what you have,
Right.
whether it's staffing or equipment. But for everybody to say, oh, you do a great job and get on the back and walk away is unrealistic. Because there is a shortfall. What you have, you do well with. But you know, it's not gonna sustain itself. So
And those are conversations that have to happen in the houses. So within the fire hall, to say, okay, what else do we need and what do we do? And so not a conversation here, but
Well, maybe it is for here. Maybe it is. We look at the volunteers, volunteer model and go, how do you do this? Incentives is one thing. I think if you look throughout the country, they have tried every bell and whistle thought, you know, in the world to sustain it. And it's, you know, it's, you get a bump a little bit, you know, you could go out to this community and say, look, this is what we're thinking, and everybody, oh, we're all about it, and, you know, you get a little bump. And then I look at that and go, but is that bump gonna sustain itself going for, you know, that bump is good for a year, past a year, right back to what we were.
so is there a standardized training program out there?
There's JPRs and recommendations through the NFPA.
So
standardized training is dictated by New York State. I mean, you saw that.
And it's hard to argue that because there's career departments that don't meet it, right? With the minimal staffing and everything like that. But that's a really tough topic to argue.
With the staffing.
Yeah, with the staffing
Training.
levels.
Training.
Yeah, training, obviously, they better. If you're paid to be there, you should probably do your training. But that's a tough one, because there's definitely two sides to it following 100% standards in that sense. Like, yes, everybody should be completely trained. But when it comes to certain NFPA requirements, or is anybody meeting? There's probably some places, but
It's NFPA, I should say. It's a
guideline,
goal, right?
it's a guideline, yeah, it's not.
And then OFBC, they release best practices specifically for New York State, and they let it see for the volunteers. At a fair.
I guess the county tries to provide some of those resources, and some people think they're great, some people think they're terrible. I mean, that's a whole nother debatable topic of what we pay taxes for. But how does that work? For those minimal training standards.
That's hard to say what the right amount is. I did 800 something hours of training this year at work. And there's no volunteer that's gonna do 800 hours. And there's,
Why would they?
and I can still get better at work. So, never be perfect.
Yeah, I don't think, never gonna achieve perfection, but we always strive for that. I was just thinking too, with some of this is safety aspect of, you go through the minutia of volunteers with incentives, and there's a little bump for a couple more people, and then they're gone again, et cetera. At some point, staffing gets to the point where that's not safe to carry on a fireground operation, or you got a car accident. And basically, we used to use the truck as blocks because we didn't have enough people to block the road off, and the cops would be on. You can't do that. Well, I have to, because not enough of us to maintain, right? So, it gets to that point, and maybe you are to that point. I don't know, but,
Well, didn't we have a fire where we didn't have enough people and somebody had something come down on
We've
that?
had fires. We've just had a good fire. I shouldn't say it's a good fire, but our response and the outcome.
Way
was-
more than enough people,
Sure.
depending on what the scene is. I mean, it's right, yeah, whole house gone, would have been a different story probably.
And
Even
this
I
should
mean,
be,
yeah.
they should be looked at as bare minimum goal. The fire didn't get any worse after the fire department showed up.
And everybody goes home safe.
And everybody was-
Nobody got hurt.
there unfortunately is times where it's not the case. So the consistency with both volunteer fire departments is a concern as well. The flips, the riding the high peaks of everything till the next high peak after the low valley, and so on. That continues to persist as an issue. Bringing consistency through any of these models would be a welcome change in my head.
Let's put together a cross-reference sheet where we can take a look at some of the issues that we have, and there overlap and crossing with the structures. See if we can find some pluses. There's gonna be some that are the same, but see where we can find some boosts, and some bumps up. Right, so our next meeting is January 11th. Steve Tritter's gone, right? Oh, he's here? Okay, so Steve, when you and Anthony and Corey and I got together at the firehouse, there was some additional data and information that you were gonna work to put into graphic models that are consistent with Honey Falls. You know, you and Anthony are still working on those.
Yes, ma'am.
So, as soon as anything there is ready, let me know. And we'll see how we go with this cross-referencing with modeling. But we may need a couple of offline meetings from here just to make sure that narrative and graphics are aligning correctly and expressed correctly. So I'll be in touch with you and Anthony, well, through Pete and Corey. So hopefully we can continue to do some of that for clarity and correctness here for the committee purpose. All right, anybody have anything else? All right, well, I thank you for what we did. As we look toward January 11th and knowing we're gonna do some cross-referencing, hopefully you can hang in there till 8:30 again and see where we go. All right, very good. Thank you all. Enjoy the holidays.
Thank you, Muffy.
Okay.